What ancient humans did during week-long rains. You think you're bored when you can't leave your house for a day. Imagine being trapped in a cave for 7 days straight with nothing but fire, stone tools, and the same people you've been living with for the past 5 years. This is what ancient humans actually did when the rain wouldn't stop, and their survival strategies were way more sophisticated than you'd think. Welcome back. Today, we're exploring one of the most underrated aspects of prehistoric life. What happened when Mother Nature basically locked everyone indoors for a week? And trust me, their solutions to boredom, social conflict, and survival during extended rainfall reveal something profound about human nature itself. Let's start with the obvious: shelter. When it rained for days on end, ancient humans didn't just huddle in any cave. They had specific strategies for weatherproofing that blow apart the idea that these people were primitive in any meaningful sense. The entrance of a chosen shelter would be analyzed for water runoff patterns. They'd look at which direction rain typically came from and position themselves deeper inside, away from the entrance. Some groups would create barriers using animal hides and bone structures, essentially building a primitive buffer zone to keep moisture and cold away from their sleeping and gathering areas. But here's what really gets interesting. They had backup shelters. Archaeological evidence shows that hunter-gatherer bands didn't just maintain one cave or campsite. They had multiple locations, some specifically designated for rainy seasons. These weren't random. They were strategically placed near food stores, water sources that wouldn't flood, and most importantly, areas where they could safely send out hunting parties without losing sight of the main shelter. It's resource management on a level that required planning and communication. This wasn't luck, this was intelligence. Now, staying dry was only half the problem. The real challenge was food. When rain made hunting impossible for days at a time, ancient humans relied on something that changed the entire trajectory of human civilization: food preservation and storage. We're talking about preserved meat, dried fish, nuts, seeds, and tubers stored in specific areas within the cave or shelter. They knew exactly how to keep food from rotting in humid conditions. They'd hang meat higher up where smoke from fires could dry it out. They'd store nuts in clay containers that they'd sealed with natural resins. Some groups even created underground storage pits where the temperature stayed cool and stable. But, and this is crucial, they didn't have enough to just sit around eating all week. They had to ration. This required a level of discipline that speaks volumes about their understanding of long-term consequence. Skip to later in the week and you're going hungry. Ancient humans knew this and they managed it. So what did they do when food was limited and movement was impossible? They worked. This is where it gets really fascinating. Rainy periods weren't downtime, they were production time. Archaeological sites consistently show that tool manufacturing was often concentrated in layers where evidence suggests prolonged occupancy. When hunters couldn't go out, they stayed home and made tools. We're talking about stone blades, bone needles, wooden spears, fishing hooks, and rope. Some of these items took hours to complete properly. A single flint blade could take an experienced knapper 3 to 4 hours to finish to precision standards. Think about that. They'd sit by the fire, rain pounding outside, and methodically craft tools that might not be used for weeks or months. But they did it anyway because they understood forward planning. They understood that preparation during abundant times meant survival during scarce times. That's not primitive thinking, that's capital investment. And they weren't just making tools in silence, they were teaching. Rainy week confinement was educational time. Younger members of the group would watch and learn from experienced toolmakers. Elders would pass down techniques that had been refined over generations. Mistakes could be corrected without the pressure of needing to hunt immediately. A child who broke a tool while learning could afford to break it because there wasn't an urgent need for that tool right now. This was school. This was the transmission of culture, technique, and knowledge. But toolmaking was just one activity. Evidence suggests ancient humans also spent significant time on art. Hand stencils in caves often show concentrated clusters in areas that appear to be shelter sites. Some researchers believe that rainy, confined periods were when people created these stencils, blowing pigment around their hands to create prints. Were these artistic, spiritual, a way to pass time? Probably all three. The point is that ancient humans weren't mindlessly sitting around. They were creating. They were expressing something that went beyond pure survival. They were bored, and boredom drove them to make meaning. Rainy periods also meant storytelling time. This is something we can't directly observe from archaeological evidence, but linguistic analysis and anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups suggest that stories were a primary form of entertainment and cultural transmission during confined periods. Myths were refined, history was rehearsed, stories about dangers, successes, and moral lessons were shared and reinforced. A week-long reign could mean 7 nights of storytelling. That's a lot of cultural encoding happening in one rainy spell. Social dynamics during these periods probably got complicated. Living in close quarters for 7 straight days with the same group would create tension. Personality conflicts that could be avoided during active hunting seasons would become unavoidable. But ancient humans developed social structures to manage this. They had hierarchy systems, usually built around age, hunting success, or spiritual knowledge. They had rituals and customs that specified how people should interact during these confined periods. They probably had designated spaces for different activities: a sleeping area, a tool-making area, a food preparation area, and a gathering area. They also had games. Archaeological sites have yielded gaming pieces, dice-like objects made from bone, and marked stones that suggest gaming practices. These weren't just ways to pass time, they were often tied to social hierarchy and decision-making. Games could determine who got better food portions, who would lead the next hunt, or settle disputes without violence. Games were conflict resolution strategies. Games were how they maintained social cohesion when patience was being tested. Health and bodily maintenance was another focus during these rainy periods. Confined time meant time to treat injuries, remove parasites, clean wounds, and craft medical remedies. Archaeological evidence shows that ancient humans understood basic medical practices. They knew certain plants had healing properties, they understood how to splint broken bones, and they recognized infections as serious problems. A week of rain meant a week of recovery time for hunters with injuries that would normally force them to still hunt despite pain. They probably also groomed extensively. Parasite removal was a social activity in many ancient communities. Group members would meticulously clean each other's hair and skin. It served a hygiene purpose, yes, but it also reinforced social bonds. Touch and physical closeness, non-violent, caring touch, was part of how communities maintained cohesion. Rainy weeks meant more grooming time, which meant stronger social bonds heading into the next hunting season. Now, what about spirituality? Evidence suggests that rainy confinement periods might have been when spiritual practices were most active. Shamanic practices, ritual preparation, spiritual training for young initiates, these things require time and focus. They're not compatible with an urgent need to hunt. But a week of rain? That's 7 days to perform ceremonies, to fast, to meditate, to prepare psychologically for the next hunting season. The spiritual life of ancient communities probably had rhythm that synced with seasonal weather patterns. The psychological side of this is worth considering too. Modern humans struggle with cabin fever after a few days. Ancient humans didn't have that luxury. They had to adapt psychologically, and they did. There's evidence that they had a different relationship with confinement than we do. They probably experienced it as a normal part of the seasonal cycle, not as an exception. Their communities were structured to make confinement manageable. They had strategies, they had routines, they had meaning-making activities that converted dead time into productive time. By the end of a week-long reign, an ancient human community would have several new tools: refined stories, healed injuries, reinforced social bonds, completed spiritual practices, and probably some resolved conflicts. They'd be psychologically prepared for the next phase of survival. They wouldn't be traumatized or resentful. They'd be ready. Here's what all of this reveals. Ancient humans weren't passive victims of circumstance. They were active managers of their lives, their time, and their communities. A week of rain wasn't a disaster to survive, it was a normal cycle to navigate with intelligence, skill, and meaning making. We often think of our ancestors as struggling against nature, barely surviving, constantly desperate, but the evidence suggests something different. They understood their environment, they planned ahead, they created multiple ways to stay occupied, healthy, and connected. They transformed unavoidable constraints into productive time. In many ways, they were better adapted to confinement than we are. The next time you're stuck at home during bad weather, think about what an ancient human would do. They probably wouldn't scroll mindlessly. They'd create something, they'd teach something, they'd strengthen a relationship, they'd prepare for the future, they'd find meaning. Maybe that's the real lesson from the week-long rains of prehistory. Thanks for watching. If you want to explore more about how ancient humans actually lived and how different it was from what we're often taught, make sure you're subscribed. We dive deep into these questions every week, uncovering the sophistication, intelligence, and resilience of our ancestors. See you in the next one.